He didn't make it in time for his wife's surgery at the hospital because he had driven out to JFK to pick up his high school sweetheart. From that day on, his wife's cell phone went straight to voicemail and never connected again. Through absolute silence, she taught him exactly what it means to lose someone forever. The empty seat outside the operating room, Julian. Please sign right here on the dotted line, Audrey said, placing the divorce papers and the property settlement agreement on the mahogany coffee table. Please sign these right now. Her voice was quiet, carrying no trace of emotion, sounding exactly like a local morning weather broadcast. Sitting across from her, her husband, Julian, did not look up from his smartphone. The screen displayed the arrivals board for John F. Kennedy International Airport. Drop this for now. Close flight lands at 7:40 p.m., and I want to beat the traffic on the Van Wyck Expressway. I was discharged from the hospital today, Audrey said. I assume you arranged a car for me. 3 days ago was the day of my surgery. Finally, Julian furrowed his brow. It was not out of concern, but irritation at having an old argument dragged out again. The surgery went fine. The doctor called me. How long are you going to hold this over my head? Audrey pressed a hand to her left side. The small laparoscopic incisions still radiated heat under the gauze, pulling tight from the inside every time she shifted her posture. On the day of the operation, the hospital had planned to brief her husband, her listed emergency contact, on the procedure. Although Audrey was a legal adult capable of signing her own consent forms, the staff had repeatedly explained that she needed a family member present to take her home after the general anesthesia. Julian had promised he would absolutely be there, yet he never showed. Accompanied by a nurse, Audrey waited outside the operating room from 9 sounds in the morning until just past noon. She called his phone multiple times. It rang endlessly before going straight to voicemail. The hospital could not delay her surgical slot any longer. Audrey listened to the medical briefing alone, signed her own consent forms alone, and changed her emergency contact to her best friend, Morgan. When she woke up, the chair next to her bed was empty. She had received exactly one text message from Julian. Chloe is anxious about being back in the States after so long. I am going to JFK to pick her up. Let the hospital staff handle the post-op stuff. Chloe Sinclair was Julian's high school sweetheart, a woman who had moved to Geneva with her family 7 years ago. Audrey only learned after her wedding that Julian's family had forcefully separated the two young lovers. Loathing the idea of an alliance with the Sinclairs, whose family business had once faced severe financial ruin. Audrey's marriage fresh out of college, Audrey had performed CPR on Nathaniel when he collapsed on a subway platform. Taken by her straightforward, earnest nature, Nathaniel bulldozed over his son and daughter-in-law's objections to arrange a marriage between Audrey and his grandson, Julian. High society gossiped endlessly about how a girl from an ordinary middle-class family had secured a spot in the Prescott dynasty. Audrey herself had believed that with enough time she could carve out a place in Julian's heart. She tried for 5 years. She learned to cook the low-sodium meals he preferred, memorized the family structures of his corporate clients, and was always the first to check seating arrangements at Prescott family galas. When he came home late, she served reheated dinners. When he traveled overseas, she drove to JFK to pick him up. When Audrey's mother was hospitalized, Julian prioritized a corporate dinner. He did not even show up for her mother's final moments. He claimed he had an unavoidable board meeting, but Audrey later discovered he had spent that evening on a FaceTime call with Chloe. Even then, Audrey had protected their marriage, not out of a sense of debt to his grandfather, but because she refused to easily label the life she had chosen with the man she loved a failure. However, that empty seat outside the operating room crystallized 5 years of tiny, accumulating voids all at once. While Julian was grabbing Chloe's suitcases off the luggage carousel at JFK, Audrey, fighting the severe dry mouth brought on by anesthesia, pressed the nurse call button alone. A nurse brought her water with a straw, helping her sip it slowly. That simple act of kindness hurt far more than her husband's absence. Audrey had already signed her name on the designated line of the divorce papers. She had also confirmed the legal steps to restore her maiden name with her attorney, Sarah Jenkins. "You are going to the airport then," Audrey said. "Yeah, Chloe is moving back to New York to rebuild her life. As an old friend, I cannot just abandon her, but you could abandon my surgery." Julian's fingers stopped tapping his screen. Audrey's tone was not accusatory. She was long past the stage of casting blame. "You do not have to sign it today. My lawyer will contact you formally, but I am leaving this house." "You are being dramatic," he said. "If you are in pain, go to bed. We will talk when I get back. You do not have to come back to me." Julian looked up at her for the first time. Audrey smiled. She did not cry, nor did she yell. She had used up all her energy for that outside the operating room. "I will simply no longer be in the place you returned to." She packed her mother's heirloom jade bracelet and the fashion design portfolio she had put together in college into a duffel bag. She did not touch any of the expensive jewelry or designer handbags the Prescotts had gifted her as she put on her shoes in the foyer. Julian spoke from behind her. "Are you seriously walking out?" Audrey did not look back. 3 days ago I signed the consent forms for my own surgery. Today I am signing the consent forms for my own life, that is all." The heavy front door clicked shut. Julian did not chase after her. To him, missing a flight arrival 2 hours from now still seemed like the more realistic loss. From that night on, Audrey's phone would never connect to his again. Audrey sought refuge in Morgan's one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. Morgan, an advertising planner and Audrey's friend since college, took one look at the small duffel bag in the entryway and issued her orders before even asking for details. "I do not have a guest mattress. We are splitting my bed, and you are banned from doing any chores until your incisions heal." "I am so sorry for dropping in on you out of nowhere," Audrey said. "You are apologizing to the wrong person." Morgan took Audrey's hospital bag and pulled some meal-prepped chicken soup out of the fridge. The seasoning was a little heavy-handed, but Audrey nearly cried after the first bite, having someone prepare something warm just for her. Since when did Audrey start viewing such a simple thing as an extraordinary stroke of luck? Her smartphone screen was lined with missed calls from Julian. There had not been a single text while he was driving to the airport. But after he dropped Chloe off at her hotel and returned home to find the divorce papers, he had called every 10 minutes. "Where are you?" Walking out without talking this through is irresponsible. "If this is about me not going to the hospital, I apologize. Grandmother is worried." Only that last sentence made Audrey's fingers pause. Eleanor Prescott had always looked out for Audrey. Even after Nathaniel passed away, she was the only person in the Prescott family who ever asked about Audrey's health or her lingering dreams of a career. Audrey typed a brief message solely to Eleanor. "I am so sorry for causing you to worry. I am in a safe place. Once my health stabilizes, I will come greet you in person." She then blocked Julian's number and deleted him from her messaging apps. Cutting off his words was not a punishment. It was a necessary medical procedure for her own recovery. The next morning, Audrey visited the office of attorney Sarah Jenkins to avoid jarring her abdominal wounds. She accepted a seat someone offered her on the subway and walked slowly from the station. Jenkins was a woman in her 40s who had previously handled the probate process for Audrey's mother's estate. "We cannot file the divorce papers immediately if he refuses to sign," Jenkins explained. "First, we will send a letter of representation consolidating all future communication through my office. I do not want much in terms of assets," Audrey said. "It is not about wanting much or little. It is about establishing your rights. The years you spent supporting the household as a homemaker count as contributions to asset building. We will separate the Prescott family wealth from the marital assets acquired during your union." Audrey gave a small nod. For 5 years, her living expenses had been paid out of a joint account, but the unpaid labor Audrey had performed went far beyond standard housework. Organizing family memorial services, selecting corporate gifts for executives, hosting charity galas as the CEO's wife, managing her grandmother-in-law's medical appointments, writing condolence letters to the families of employees. Audrey had taken on all the tasks bridging the Prescott household and the corporation entirely unseen. She did not want to convert those acts into an invoice. She just did not want them treated as if they had never existed. Jenkins frowned when she read the text messages from the day of the surgery. Please save these. It is not just about extracting alimony. If he later tries to claim you unilaterally abandoned the marriage, this shows the full context. We do not know if he and Miss Sinclair have had a physical relationship, but infidelity is not the sole basis for the breakdown of a marriage. Let us document the long-term neglect, the lack of partnership as family, and the abandonment during a critical medical event. After leaving the law firm, Audrey stopped by City Hall to confirm the paperwork needed to update her Social Security and driver's license. The divorce was not final yet. Still, just hearing about the concrete administrative steps to get her maiden name back pumped a tiny breath of fresh air into the depths of her chest. That evening, Morgan mentioned that her company was looking for a designer for an apparel project. Audrey had graduated near the top of her class from a prestigious fashion institute and spent 2 years before her marriage, assisting with design planning for an emerging label. After getting engaged to Julian, the Prescott family declared it unseemly for a future CEO's wife to be working late nights at a studio, forcing her to resign. A 5-year blank space on a resume was heavy. When she opened her old portfolio, the lines she had drawn back then looked blindingly bright. They were bold, slightly unrefined, and entirely unafraid of being disliked. I might not be good enough anymore, Audrey whispered. Morgan answered while eating a cup of bodega pudding. Whatever you are not good at anymore, you can just study and relearn. But rejecting yourself before they even see your work is strictly prohibited. You sound like a hiring manager. I am your interim chief human resources, friend. Audrey laughed. Her surgical scars pulled, making her worse instantly. But the fact that she had laughed at all felt like a victory. 3 days later, Julian showed up outside Morgan's apartment building. His voice crackling through the intercom, demanding that Morgan send Audrey down, lacked its usual authoritative bark. It was the voice of a man mixing panic with frustration. Entirely unsure of what words would unlock the door, Morgan did not answer. Attorney Jenkins had already sent a formal notice barring direct contact. Audrey peeked through the gap in the curtains and saw Julian standing by the curb. He was wearing an expensive trench coat, checking his smartphone over and over. The old Audrey would have grabbed an umbrella and run downstairs the moment it looked like rain. She would have worried that he had skipped dinner. Now she simply closed the blinds. It was not because she wanted him to suffer. It was so she would stop adjusting her own pain to fit his convenience. Julian finally signed the divorce papers 3 weeks after Audrey moved out. During their first mediation session, he sat across from Attorney Jenkins and claimed his wife was just being emotional. Audrey did not argue when she heard those words. She laid out a chronological timeline on the conference table, the date of her mother's funeral, the hospital admission and discharge records, the text messages sent on the day of her surgery, and 5 years of communication logs. If I appear emotional, please read these numbers and dates. Julian fell silent. On the day Audrey lost her mother, he had claimed he was in a critical board meeting, but his corporate calendar showed the meeting had ended at 3:00 p.m. Digital logs proved he had spent nearly 2 hours on FaceTime with Chloe later that afternoon. For the first time, Julian saw the crushing weight of the hours he had erased with the simple excuse of being busy. I will divide the assets however Audrey wants, Julian said. But there is no rush on the divorce. I am in a rush, Audrey replied. I have waited 5 years. Nothing has happened between Chloe and me yet. I am not trying to put your relationship with her on trial, Audrey said quietly. I simply cannot continue my relationship with you, that is all. To Julian, those words were far more brutal than being accused of an affair. An affair could be argued. This left no room for defense. Eventually, the two finalized the terms of their settlement. A division of the savings occurred during the marriage, reimbursement for Audrey's medical expenses, and the return of her personal belongings. Audrey firmly declined the trust fund beneficiary rights that Nathaniel Prescott had tried to leave her. Eleanor called Audrey after hearing the news. "You should take it, dear. Nathaniel wanted to leave that to you personally. I deeply appreciate the sentiment," Audrey said softly, "but if I accept it now, I feel like I will be trapped living inside the Prescott family's narrative forever." On the other end of the line, Eleanor let out a long breath. "I am so sorry I could not protect you. My husband asked me to watch over you time and time again. Watching over me was not enough." At those words, Audrey shed tears for the first time. They were not tears of anger toward Julian, but tears for a sense of understanding that had arrived entirely too late. The day the divorce was finalized was a clear, crisp morning. At the Social Security Administration office, Audrey filed the paperwork to restore her maiden name and received the necessary documents to update her insurance and bank accounts. Audrey Mercer. When the clerk called out her new name, Audrey's response was delayed by a fraction of a second. The name that had been entirely normal for her third marriage sounded as if it were echoing back from a great distance. When she walked out of the building, Julian was waiting at the bottom of the steps. He had been present for the legal proceedings, but had barely spoken a word. "I will drive you," he offered. "I am fine. I will take the subway. It has not even been a month since your surgery." "That is exactly why I need to walk at my own pace." Julian tried to say something else, but swallowed the words. Audrey pulled her wedding ring out of her purse. "I am returning this. Keep it as a memory." Julian could not formulate a reply. Audrey set the ring down on a nearby bench. She felt that if she handed it directly back into his palm the moment their fingers brushed, 5 years of lingering attachment might resurrect itself. "Julian, if you ever live with someone else in the future, please pay close attention to them exactly when they are not saying anything." "Audrey, people who stay silent are not unheard. They have just learned that speaking up will not reach you anyway." Audrey offered a slight nod and walked toward the subway station. Julian did not follow her. The era where he believed chasing her would make her turn around was over. The very first act of atonement he could offer was not violating the distance she had finally set. That night, Audrey sat in Morgan's apartment and drafted her resume. There was a glaring 5-year gap under her work history. In the past, she would have felt ashamed of that blank white space. Now, under the additional notes section, she honestly listed management of family medical care, coordination of corporate and family events, and independent study of digital apparel design. She would not romanticize the time she spent at home, nor would she pretend it never happened. Morgan peeked over her shoulder. "Desired position designer, that works," Audrey thought for a moment, then deleted the word and retyped. "Assistant designer, I am relearning from the ground up. I left my pride right next to that wedding ring." The two women looked at each other and burst out laughing. The next morning, Audrey sent her application to 5 companies. 3 sent back rejection emails. 1 never replied. The final company sent her an interview schedule. Audrey read the email over and over. Her life had not drastically transformed, but one single door had opened under her own name. Audrey's interview was at a Teller Node, a mid-market apparel company headquartered in Manhattan's Garment District. They did not make luxury couture. They produced sensible, well-made clothing for working women, selling primarily through department stores and online channels. Diane Caldwell, the director of design, flipped through Audrey's portfolio in complete silence from the first page to the last. "These designs are from 5 years ago." "Yes. I have been teaching myself the latest CAD software recently, but I am not at a professional level yet. Your knowledge of modern textiles is outdated too." "That is correct." The harsh questions kept coming. Audrey did not use her past design awards as a shield. She knew that the more she inflated her pre-marriage self, the deeper her current 5-year gap would look. Finally, Diane asked, "Why do you want to come back?" Audrey swallowed the polished professional objective she had prepared. "Because I want to rebuild my own life with my own hands. I believe the clothes we wear provide a small dose of courage to step out the front door. For a long time, I lost the courage to step outside. So this time, I want to return to the side that creates it. Diane stared at Audrey for a long time. 3-month contract employee. Your title is design assistant. You will be taking orders from employees younger than you. I accept, please. The night she got the hiring call, Morgan took her out to a neighborhood taco joint to celebrate. Since Audrey still could not drink alcohol after her surgery, they clinked glasses of club soda. The former Mrs. Prescott starting over by hauling fabric samples, Morgan teased. Being a corporate wife does not count as work experience, but it builds character. Coordinating banquets, handling difficult relatives, crisis management, on call 24/7. The pay was terrible, though. Audrey surprised herself by being able to joke about it. The actual work, however, was far more grueling than she imagined. On her first day, she was not handed a new design concept, but the task of logging 120 prototype garments, SKUs numbers, manufacturing plant codes, cost efficiency ratios, revision histories. The inventory systems had completely changed in 5 years, and just finding the right drop-down menus on the screen ate up her time. Paige, a 26-year-old junior designer, showed no mercy. Audrey, the cuff measurements on this spec sheet are half an inch off. If this goes to the factory in Allentown, the whole batch will have to be remade. I am so sorry. I will fix it right away. Instead of apologizing, get in the habit of double-checking the revision logs. Paige's tone was icy, but she was never wrong. When Audrey went home, she watched software tutorials online and copied modern sewing terminology into a notebook. Her fingertips felt blunt and out of practice. The first time she sat at a sewing machine in years, her stitch lines veered crooked. A muslin mock-up that would have taken her an hour in the past now took 3. One night, finding herself alone in the company restroom, the tears finally spilled over. When she was part of the Prescott family, people treated her like someone who did nothing. But now that she was back in the workforce, she had to face the reality that she genuinely could not do anything. Past confidence did not finish today's workload. She called Morgan, who listened silently before speaking. Do you want to quit? I do not know. I feel so embarrassed. I just keep thinking about how I used to be able to do all this. Stop competing with the old Audrey. If you can do one thing next week that you could not do today, that is a win. That is easy for you to say. It is not easy. That is why I will listen to you complain about it every single night. The next day, Audrey bowed her head to Paige and asked her to teach her the workflow procedures from step 1. Paige looked slightly taken aback. Does it not bother you to ask someone younger than you? Failing because I pretended to know something bothers me much more. From that day on, their dynamic shifted slightly. Paige remained strict, but she began explaining the reasoning behind her corrections. Audrey, in turn, applied the logistical coordination skills she had honed running a wealthy household, creating a streamlined master spreadsheet for sample return schedules. The department's missing inventory dropped drastically. Even Diane muttered, "It is not glamorous, but it is a lifesaver." Audrey's first design proposal was approved 6 weeks after she was hired. It was a commuter dress for women in their 30s. The initial concept assumed a cinched waist and high heels. During the fitting session, Audrey noticed that every time an employee sat down, they discreetly adjusted the fabric over their stomachs. Could we raise the waist seam slightly so it doesn't compress the abdomen when sitting? Audrey suggested in the design meeting. I want it to be comfortable to wear, even on days when you are not feeling 100% or recovering from a medical procedure. A young male sales rep chuckled. If we cater to such a niche demographic, the silhouette will look frumpy. Audrey thought of her own surgical scars. After her discharge, none of the designer clothes in her closet felt bearable against her abdomen. It is not niche, Audrey stated firmly. Surgeries, menstrual cycles, pregnancies, postpartum recovery, caregiving, exhaustion. Very few women walk around in the exact physical condition of a fashion campaign model every single day. Looking beautiful should not require silently enduring pain. Diane ordered a prototype. The finished dress maintained its sleek visual lines, but the fabric naturally gave way only when the wearer sat down. It received stellar reviews during internal fittings and was greenlit as an online exclusive. Audrey's name was printed in small letters in the designer section of the spec sheet. The night she saw those tiny letters, she slipped her mother's jade bracelet onto her wrist. "Mom, I made it back a little bit," she spoke to the empty apartment. Tears fell, but they were no longer the tears of sorrow she had once known. Meanwhile, inside the Prescott household, Audrey's absence manifested not in operational chaos, but in a subtle, chilling lack of warmth. The corporate assistants managed the schedules, yet they missed the quiet nuances Audrey had mastered over 5 years. A congratulatory gift sent to a major client was technically correct, but lacked the personal touch that had once secured their loyalty. Grandmother Eleanor's appointments were kept, but no one remembered to ask about her lingering discomfort after therapy. Every time Julian snapped, "Why did no double double-check this?" his assistant finally replied, "Because Mrs. Prescott used to send us a comprehensive itinerary beforehand, sir." For the first time, Julian realized Audrey had not just been sitting around the house. She had been the hidden wiring inside the massive corporate structure of the Prescott family. Only after the wires were cut did he understand just how many rooms she had been keeping the lights on in. However, realizing a mistake and being able to undo it were two different things. When Julian ordered his staff to track down Audrey's new workplace, Eleanor stopped him. "Before you chase her, ask yourself if you even have the right to. I just want to apologize." An apology does not obligate the other person to accept it. Julian lost his words. Audrey, meanwhile, had no idea what he was thinking, and it was better that way. Her days were packed with crowded morning subway commutes, fabric color codes, crooked stitch lines, lunches with coworkers, applying ointment to her scars, and studying late into the night. The clock that had spent 5 years revolving entirely around Julian's return time had finally begun ticking for her own life. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Chloe Sinclair appeared at a Tellier node. The receptionist called back, "Audrey, there is a visitor for you." When Audrey walked out to the lobby, she found Chloe dressed in a white sundress with a pale beige handbag, sitting on the leather sofa like a page out of a magazine, saying, "Long time no see feels strange, doesn't it? This is the first time we are properly meeting." Audrey sat across from her. "What can I do for you?" Chloe placed a thick cream-colored envelope on the coffee table. "We are hosting an engagement gala next month. I would love for you to be there." It had only been 2 months since the divorce. Even if it was just a gala in name, it was clearly a massive PR event to signal the repaired alliance between the Prescott and Sinclair families. Audrey did not touch the envelope. "I will not be attending." "Really? I thought it would be good for you to see it with your own eyes. See what the person Julian was truly waiting for all this time." Chloe's smile was soft, but the words were laced with fine needles. In the past, Audrey would have been devastated. She would have felt like she was being told her 5-year marriage was nothing but a roadblock to their epic romance. But things were different now. "Miss Sinclair, are you incapable of feeling like the chosen one, unless I am playing the role of the discarded wife?" Chloe's smile froze. "What is that supposed to mean? If my misery is the required proof of your happiness, then your engagement seems terribly fragile." "You don't have to put on a brave face," Chloe said tightly. "I am not putting on a brave face, I am simply no longer waiting for Julian." Audrey pushed the envelope back across the table. "Believe in the man you chose and take responsibility for that choice yourself. Do not make me your audience." Chloe stood up, her face rigid. "Have you always been like this? For a girl from an ordinary background, you are awfully arrogant." Audrey stood up as well. "I was raised in an ordinary home by a mother who loved me dearly. I have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of." After Chloe left, Audrey's hands shook. She was not completely fine. The man she had loved for 5 years was going public with his future with another woman so soon. It was impossible for her heart not to ache. Paige handed her a paper cup of water. "Are you okay?" "Just a little overwhelmed." "If it is just a little, Go cry in the stockroom for 5 minutes. I will cover the phones. Audrey let out a wet laugh and actually went to the stockroom to cry. When she finished, she washed her face and returned to the afternoon design meeting. Recovery, she realized, did not mean never feeling pain again. It meant that even when it hurt, you could still return to your work, your meals, and your sleep. A few days later, a letter arrived from Eleanor. Audrey's name had been placed on the potential guest list at the Prescott family's insistence. It seemed Chloe had preemptively delivered the invitation herself. "You do not have to come," Eleanor wrote in her trembling cursive. "Your life does not exist just to play along with that family's rituals." She ended the letter with a sharp vow. "I will never let Julian forget exactly what it is he threw away." Audrey wrote back a simple reply, checking on Eleanor's health. On the day of the engagement gala, Morgan told her, "Let's go. You read the letter. You don't have to go. I don't have to, but a small part of me wants to." Audrey could not give a perfectly logical answer. She was terrified. She felt that seeing the two of them together might drag her right back into playing the supporting character of her own 5-year marriage. But at the same time, she hated the idea of feeling like she was constantly running away even more than she hated them thinking she had fled. "Can I leave halfway through?" she asked. "Absolutely. I am driving the getaway car," Morgan promised. Audrey wore a black dress she had designed herself. It did not restrict her abdomen, and a single elegant seam flowed down the back. It was not armor, but it was a garment that naturally forced her to stand tall. The venue was the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. White floral cascades, champagne towers, Wall Street executives and journalists. Julian stood next to Chloe, wearing a midnight blue tuxedo. The moment Julian spotted Audrey, his expression shifted. It was not joy, nor was it anger. It was the face of a man looking at something he knew he was not allowed to hope for. Chloe had intentionally seated Audrey near the front. Halfway through the banquet, the MC announced, "And now we would like to invite Miss Audrey Mercer, a guest with deep ties to the couple, to offer a few words of congratulation." A murmur rippled through the ballroom. Morgan whispered, "You can just refuse." Audrey stood up. She was not doing this to stop running away. She was not doing this to defeat anyone. She simply refused to let her own narrative end under someone else's stage direction. When she took the microphone at the podium, countless eyes locked onto her. "I am Audrey Mercer. I am Julian Prescott's former wife." The ballroom fell dead silent. "I suppose the beautiful thing to say would be that I sincerely wish the two of you well on your new journey, but I am not quite noble enough for that yet." Chloe's face stiffened. Audrey continued, "For 5 years, I waited for someone to turn around and look at me. I thought waiting was what love meant. I thought offering up my own time was the definition of loyalty." Julian stopped breathing. "But one day," Audrey said, her voice steady, "I listened to the medical risks of my own surgery alone, and I signed the consent forms with my own name. That was the day I learned something. If there is no one coming to pick you up during the most critical moments of your life, you have to go pick yourself up." No one clapped. They knew the speech was not over. Audrey raised her glass slightly, her posture impeccable under the ballroom lights. "I stand here tonight not as a memory of the Prescott family, but as Audrey Mercer. I wish Julian and Chloe the future they have meticulously planned for themselves. May it bring them everything they believe they deserve." She set her glass down with a soft click. "As for me, my story is finally moving forward under my own name." She turned back to face the sprawling ballroom. "Today, I did not come to give a congratulatory toast as a former wife. I came as Audrey Mercer to put a period at the end of my past. The two of you will build your future, and I will build mine." She set the microphone down and gave a slight bow. The first person to clap was Eleanor. She struck her aged hands together in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Then Morgan, then Diane, who had also been invited, and other women in the crowd. The applause rippled outward, growing louder. Audrey stepped off the stage. Julian tried to follow her, but Eleanor slammed her cane into the carpet. "You stay right next to Chloe today. Stop running away from the places you chose for yourself." Audrey walked out of the ballroom without looking back. The night air outside on Fifth Avenue was warm. Morgan caught up to her, and they sat together on a bench near Central Park. Audrey's knees were shaking. That was terrifying, Audrey breathed. Yeah, but you are okay now. Morgan silently wrapped an arm around her shoulders. For the first time, Audrey did not feel like she had won. She just felt that she no longer had to prove she hadn't lost. 3 days after the gala, an anonymous gossip forum and several tabloid accounts published a hit piece targeting Audrey. Wealthy heir's ex-wife crashes engagement gala demanding reconciliation. Middle-class climber clings to Prescott name post-divorce. Is her career comeback just a PR stunt? The article featured a photo of Audrey sitting alone in a hospital corridor, another of her riding a crowded subway, and a snapshot of her meeting Chloe outside a Tellier node. When Audrey saw the hospital photo, her blood ran cold. It was a picture of her waiting outside the operating room the day her aunt Martha Mercer had collapsed from a brain hemorrhage. The list of people who knew she was there was incredibly short. Someone had been intentionally tailing her. Audrey's hands shook with rage. This was Chloe, wasn't it? Morgan said. Let's go to the police and a lawyer. Save all the evidence first. Audrey contacted Attorney Jenkins and recorded every article, timestamp, amplifying account, and comment. Jenkins immediately prepared to issue takedown requests and file for the disclosure of the posters' IP addresses. You have the right to remain silent, Jenkins advised. However, if you do, the caricature they have built of you is the only thing that will remain in the public eye. I agree, Audrey said. She opened her own social media account. She typed a short headline. My past marriage is a matter of record, but it is not my identity. I refuse to be defined as a footnote in someone else's biography. I am Audrey Mercer, a designer rebuilding her career from the ground up. She did not lay out every single detail of her 5-year marriage. Exposing her private life to the internet could easily become a fresh wound. She simply stated the facts. Her husband's absence during her mother's final hours. The fact that on the day of her surgery, her husband, her emergency contact, who promised to pick her up, went to JFK Airport instead, that she listened to the medical briefing alone and signed the forms herself, that she started working again after her divorce and was currently learning her trade as a design assistant. Finally, she wrote, I used to be Julian Prescott's wife, but I refuse to let that fact be the first sentence used to describe who I am today. I am Audrey Mercer. I am someone who has just returned to the apparel industry. I make plenty of mistakes and not every day goes smoothly. I went to that engagement gala not to beg for a reconciliation, but to reclaim the ending of my own story from other people's stage direction. I am no longer waiting for anyone's phone call. She attached redacted screenshots of the text messages from her surgery day, proof of her finalized divorce, and a blurred portion of her hospital records. After posting it, Audrey placed her smartphone face down on the desk. She was terrified to check the notifications. She hadn't written it to fish for sympathy, but that didn't mean reading hateful comments wouldn't hurt. A few hours later, Diane called her into the conference room. The company has no intention of letting this affect your employment here, Diane said. However, we may need to field questions from our retail partners. I am so sorry for the trouble, Audrey said. Don't apologize. But are you prepared to prove through your actual work that you did not just land this job through viral notoriety? I am, Diane nodded. Good. I am putting you in charge of the fall collaborative line. The target demographic is women in their 30s and up. The original theme was the elegant society wife. Audrey looked at the brief and raised her head. I don't want to design for a wife. I want to design for a woman. Specifically marriage, divorce, caregiving, illness, career changes. An adult woman's title changes constantly, but her clothing shouldn't have to be defined by her relationship to someone else. I want to rename the line Restart. Diane narrowed her eyes, not Rebirth. Rebirth implies you magically transform into a completely clean new person in one go. Reality is much clumsier. You stop. You go back. You stop again. But you force the gears to move anyway. I want clothes that reflect that. The pitch was green lit. Meanwhile, Audrey's post was spreading like wildfire. He went to pick up his high school girlfriend while his wife was in surgery. Calling her a fame seeker just for working a normal job is insane. The line, "not a former wife, but a designer," struck a massive chord. It wasn't just sympathy. Audrey's inbox flooded with long messages from women who had lived through similar experiences. Women who quit their jobs because of their husband's relocation. Women who spent a decade out of the workforce doing elder care. Women who stopped wearing the clothes they loved because they were self-conscious about surgical scars. Audrey could not reply to all of them, but she read every single one, transferring their words into her design notebook. "I am terrified of clothes that squeeze my waist every time. Time an interviewer asks us about a resume gap, I feel like I'm being accused of being lazy. I just want to be called by a name that isn't mom or wife." Restart was no longer just Audrey's personal revenge wardrobe. Around the same time, the PR department at Prescott Enterprises was overwhelmed with press inquiries. Julian read Audrey's post over and over. His own brief text message sat on the screen, a piece of cold, irrefutable evidence. At the time, he honestly thought Audrey was strong enough to handle the hospital alone. Not because she actually was invincible, but because he had become so accustomed to exploiting her support that he had completely lost the ability to see her vulnerability. An internal investigation revealed that the PR firm initiating the smear campaign was directly linked to Chloe's personal manager. The hospital photos were taken by a private investigator Chloe had hired. Julian walked into the bridal boutique where Chloe was doing a fitting and dropped the investigation dossier on the table. "Why did you have Audrey followed?" At first, Chloe played dumb, then she blamed her staff. Finally, she broke down, screaming in tears. Chloe met his gaze, her expression hardening as the delicate facade slipped away. "I did what was necessary to protect our standing, Julian. Audrey was weaponizing her narrative to embarrass your family and undermine this merger. If I monitored her movements, it was only to ensure she wouldn't ruin everything we worked for. Do not lecture me about morality when you benefited from my silence for 7 years." Listening to her, Julian realized her words sounded eerily similar to the feelings he used to harbor toward Audrey. Chloe didn't actually love him. She just desperately needed to prove that the narrative of her waiting all those years had been the correct one. "The engagement is off," Julian said. The color drained from Chloe's face. "Because of Audrey?" "No, because I have spent my entire life blaming my choices on other people. I waited for you." Chloe screamed. "That still does not give you the right to destroy someone else." Those were the exact words Julian should have said to Audrey years ago. Chloe threw her bridal veil onto the floor and stormed out. Julian did not chase her. He was finally beginning to understand the difference between not chasing someone out of neglect and not chasing someone to respect their choices. The news of the broken engagement did not stay contained within the Prescott and Sinclair families. The Wall Street Journal's lifestyle section noted dark clouds over the dynastic merger, while tabloid magazines gleefully lined up the timeline of Audrey's divorce. Alongside the gala disaster, Audrey did not read the articles. When Attorney Jenkins informed her that Chloe's camp was willing to delete the defamatory posts and issue a public apology, Audrey simply replied, "Please proceed with the necessary legal steps." She took no joy in Chloe losing her engagement. If someone else had to fall for her to move forward, she would still be trapped inside their narrative. Right now, Audrey was staring at a mountain of restart prototypes. The first draft was a failure. In an attempt to avoid putting pressure on the abdomen, she had increased the fabric volume so much that the fit models looked like they were wearing maternity clothes. The second draft had shoulder lines so aggressive, they looked like tactical armor. Page was blunt. If a garment requires a paragraph explaining the concept before the customer can see why it's good, it fails as a product. Audrey had no counter-argument. She had been trying so hard to represent women who had survived painful experiences that she was forcing the clothes to carry the weight of the narrative. Clothes are not name tags explaining your trauma. They have to be something you can naturally reach for. Whether you are having a terrible day or a completely ordinary one, Audrey tore the concept down and started over. On her days off, she and Morgan visited Macy's, Target, and boutique shops, discreetly observing what women in their 30s to 60s checked when they stepped out of fitting rooms. My upper arms are too exposed. It's tight around my stomach when I sit. The pockets are useless. This jacket is too heavy. I can't wear this with sneakers, and I have to sprint to pick up my kids. There were no dramatic declarations of trauma. There were only the small, everyday inconveniences of living. Audrey picked them up one by one. She designed a front-fastening blouse that was easy to slip on, even for recovering from shoulder surgery. She added deep hidden pockets inside the blazers, large enough for a smartphone and medical cards. She incorporated subtle adjustable drawstrings into the waistlines of the dresses that didn't ruin the silhouette. She split the color palette into 3 tiers: fog-like gray, a camel tone close to morning light, and a deep black interwoven with fine gold stitching so the wearer's outline wouldn't vanish in the dark. Is this a progression from weakness to strength? A sales rep asked. Audrey shook her head. It is not a hierarchy of strength. The gray days and the black days belong to the same person. Some days you want to vanish. Other days you want to walk tall. I just don't want their clothes to get in the way of that choice. Diane read the revised pitch and officially named Audrey the project lead. Giving a contract worker this title is unprecedented, Diane warned. If it tanks, you will be the one explaining why to the board. I understand, Audrey said. She felt more terror than excitement. If she failed, people would say a former housewife with a 5-year gap couldn't cut it. They would laugh, claiming she just weaponized internet clout for a gimmick. Right around that time, Aunt Martha collapsed. During her lunch break, Audrey got the call from the hospital. She dropped her chopsticks and sprinted for the subway. Martha was her mother's sister. Even after Audrey had left the Prescott estate, Martha was the one who told her, "If you ever run out of places to go, I'll give you a key to my house." Brain hemorrhage, emergency surgery. When Audrey arrived at the hospital, Martha's son Caleb was shivering outside the operating room. "Audrey, Mom was totally fine this morning. She just suddenly stopped being able to speak." Audrey gripped Caleb's hands. "I can't promise everything will be okay, but I will wait here with you." During the 4-hour surgery, Audrey did not look at her phone once. If she were still at the Prescott estate, she would have been agonizing over Julian's dinner schedule and arrival time. Now, she sat entirely present for her own family. The moment the surgeon came out and said the procedure was a success, Caleb broke down sobbing. Audrey leaned against the wall, feeling all the strength drain from her legs. The hospital corridor smelled exactly like it had when she sat there alone after her own operation. Disinfectant warmed laundry, the night shift nurse's stale coffee, but this time Caleb was sitting next to her. You can never completely erase someone's pain, Audrey thought, but you can sit next to them while it hurts. The next day, Julian appeared at the hospital. He had heard the news from Caleb and brought a lavish gift basket for Martha. Seeing him in the hallway, Audrey's heart did not flutter the way it used to. "If you need anything," Julian said, "you can use the Prescott Medical Network." "I trust her attending physician," Audrey replied, "but I appreciate the thought." "Audrey, can we talk for a minute?" "We are in my aunt's hospital." Julian stopped himself. Audrey noticed the thick manila envelope he was holding. It was a proposal for a new healthcare initiative under the Prescott Foundation. "Is this for patients?" she asked. "Yeah, I want to establish a grant program that subsidizes post-operative domestic care and transportation. Your experience made me realize there was a gap." Audrey took the folder. "Please establish the program, not as a monument to your remorse, but for the people who actually need it." "I know," he said. "No, you don't, but I think you are in the middle of trying to." It was a strict assessment, but Audrey's voice held no malice. Julian nodded. "You are right." After he left, Caleb walked over holding 2 sodas from the vending machine. "So that was the ex-husband. Does he want to get back together?" "He might think he does. But I don't." "Do you hate him?" Audrey thought for a moment. "I don't hate him enough to want to keep him close." Caleb looked confused, but to Audrey the answer felt perfectly right. 2 weeks later, Martha was moved to a general ward to begin physical therapy. She had slight paralysis in her right hand, and her speech was slow. When Audrey brought the restart prototypes to show her, Martha felt the fabric with her left hand. Easy to wear. Really, buttons are big. Good. Audrey cried right then and there. A single review from a person who genuinely needed the garment grounded her as a designer far more than any high-concept fashion theory ever could. She modified the front fastening blouses so the buttons could easily be manipulated with one hand. She didn't market it as adaptive clothing for the sick. She seamlessly integrated it into the main line as a universally convenient design. Restart was no longer a collection of clothes to hide wounds. It became a line of clothing for people whose bodies and roles changed midway through their lives, helping them step outside, still looking exactly like themselves. The launch showcase for Restart took place in late autumn. The venue wasn't a glitzy Manhattan hotel, but a renovated printing warehouse in Brooklyn slated for demolition. Exposed beams, concrete walls, and a single stark white line painted down the middle of the floor. "You're using a broken building exactly as it is," Morgan asked, looking up at the ceiling. "It's not broken. It just changed its purpose," Audrey said. Right, right. Cue the profound designer quote. Audrey laughed. The models weren't just the standard 20-something waifs. There was a 32-year-old sales executive, a 5-year-old nurse, and a 58-year-old bookstore clerk. At her own request, a woman with slight paralysis similar to Aunt Martha's also walked the show. There had been pushback internally. It dilutes the brand image. It looks like a public health PSA. Even if it gets good press online, we don't know if it will convert to sales. Audrey listened to all the objections and didn't try to bulldoze them with emotion. She presented projected sales, pricing tiers, pre-order numbers, and focus group data. "I am not using diversity as a window dressing," Audrey told the board. "I am building a supply chain and a price point that the people who actually need these clothes can afford." The day before the show, the Allentown factory called the shipment of the flagship black jackets was delayed. A massive storm had disrupted logistics, and there was a chance they wouldn't arrive until the morning of the event. The old Audrey would have tried to shoulder the panic entirely alone, terrified of inconveniencing anyone. This time she didn't. "I am looping everyone in," Audrey announced to her team. "Let's figure out an alternate runway order." Paige reconfigured the display racks. The sales reps drove out to collect any available showroom samples. Morgan extended the video presentation loop, and Diane handled the buyer communications. At 2:00 a.m., Audrey was sitting on the concrete floor of the venue eating a bodega sandwich. "I used to be so bad at asking for help," Audrey said. Paige sat next to her sipping a cup of instant soup. "You still aren't great at it." Your face was literally screaming, "This is all my fault." "But you actually communicated the crisis, so you pass." They both laughed. At 6:00 a.m., the delivery truck arrived. The entire staff ran quality checks, hanging the final jacket on the rack 15 minutes before the doors opened. The audience was packed with buyers, fashion journalists, and regular customers. Many had discovered the brand through Audrey's viral post, but what they were looking at today wasn't her past. It was the clothes. The music started. The first model walked out, the fog-gray blouse, the morning camel dress, the black blazer with the striking gold stitch inside the lapel. The women didn't walk with perfect icy glares. One looked a little nervous. Another smiled at her family in the crowd. The model with partial paralysis slowly unfastened her buttons with one hand as she walked, revealing the blouse underneath. Spontaneous applause erupted from the crowd. Standing in the wings, Audrey felt tears prick her eyes, but she gripped her clipboard tightly until the very end. For the finale, Diane shoved Audrey from behind. "Get out there." "I am strictly behind the scenes," Audrey protested. "Today is the day you put your name on your work. Go." Wearing her own tailored black suit, Audrey stepped onto the white line. In the front row, she saw Morgan, Aunt Martha, Caleb, and Paige. Eleanor was there in a wheelchair, and standing at the very back of the warehouse was Julian. Audrey saw him, but she did not break her stride. She took the microphone at the center of the runway. I named this collection Restart. Rebirth is a beautiful concept, but in reality, people who have to start over don't wake up the next morning as a completely different person. Some days your scars hurt. Some days you compare yourself to who you used to be and fall into depression. You go back to work, you make mistakes, you go home and cry, and the next morning you get on the subway again. Several women in the audience nodded. Restarting doesn't mean pretending nothing ever broke. It means acknowledging the fact that you stopped and forcing the gears to move forward anyway. Audrey looked at Aunt Martha. Someone's wife, mother, daughter, patient, caregiver, those are all vital titles. But before any of those, there is just a person. I hope these clothes serve not as costumes to play those roles, but as armor for the person themselves to step outside. The applause lingered long after she finished. Pre-orders from the showcase doubled expectations. The front-fastening blouses and the adjustable dresses sold out rapidly. Audrey received messages from buyers. For the first time since my surgery, I got to choose my own outfit instead of medical wear. I wore this to my first job interview in years. Audrey's contract was converted to full-time, and she was officially given the title of design lead. Diane handed her the promotion letter and said, "Your sob story didn't sell these clothes. You translated your story into a tangible shape that other people could actually wear. That is why they sold." Audrey treasured those words. The week after the show, Julian requested a meeting. He didn't just show up outside her office, he sent a formal request for a time and place through Attorney Jenkins. Audrey met him during her lunch break at a cafe near her office. Julian didn't bring flowers or jewelry. He brought only the finalized documentation for the Prescott Foundation's medical care grant, domestic assistance, transit subsidies, short-term lodging, hospital discharge escorts for patients without emergency contacts. The operations would be outsourced to vetted nonprofits. Audrey read the packet. "It is a good program. I want to name it after you." "Please don't," Audrey answered instantly. "This is not a memorial to your apology. Make sure the people using these funds don't have to carry the weight of the Prescott family's baggage." Understood. Julian backed down without an argument. "Audrey, no matter how many times I think about it, I cannot fully imagine what it was like for you to sign those papers alone that day. You don't have to be able to imagine it. But the fact that you are trying to understand is enough." Audrey set her coffee cup down. Understanding someone and going back to them are two different things. "I know." Julian fell silent for a long moment, saying, "I am trying to understand," is the more accurate statement. Audrey gave a faint smile. The old Julian would have boldly declared that he completely understood. Now he was willing to admit what he didn't know. That change was likely genuine, but it still wasn't a reason to get back together. "Please move forward with the grant," she said. "I won't serve on the board, but I can introduce you to a nonprofit that advocates for patient rights." "Thank you. This is strictly business." So for the first time, a topic that didn't belong to the past was placed between them. As they stood up to leave, Julian asked, "Are you happy right now?" Audrey thought about it. "I no longer have to use my happiness to prove that my divorce was the right decision." Julian lowered his eyes. "There are days when I am exhausted and days when I hate my job," Audrey continued. "There are days when my scars ache, but this is my life. I am not living it to make you regret losing me." "I see. Yes." Audrey walked back toward her office. Julian didn't chase her. He watched her until her silhouette disappeared into the New York crowd, then looked down at Audrey's handwritten notes on the grant proposal. "Do not demand gratitude or require recipients to share their trauma in exchange for funding. Help is not a debt." It looked very much like advice meant for him. Following the success of Restart, Audrey's name became a magnet for opportunities. Magazines requested interviews. Conference organizers asked her to speak on the theme of a glamorous comeback from divorce, and a daytime talk show pitched a segment featuring her. Audrey turned almost all of them down. "My divorce is part of my history, but it is not my professional expertise." The PR team at Atelier Node looked frustrated. You should capitalize on the hype to boost your profile while you can. It would be a huge advantage if you ever want to launch your own brand. I want to build something that lasts even after the hype fades. Diane respected her stance, but gave her a dose of reality. You can't keep an apparel line running on beautiful ideals alone. Revenue, inventory, payroll. If you are thinking about striking out on your own, don't run away from the math. Audrey was surprised. You know, I'm thinking about leaving. You have the face of someone plotting an exit. Audrey couldn't deny it. Among the messages flooding in about restart, there was an increasing number of women asking for help preparing to re-enter the workforce. What do I put on my resume? My body changed. What do I wear? I get paralyzed with fear the night before an interview. An apparel company's product line couldn't hold their hands that far. At the same time, Audrey felt a deep gratitude toward a Telluride node. Going independent wasn't a glamorous graduation. It meant giving up a stable salary, her team, and established factory connections. She spent a year preparing. She took weekend seminars on small business management and drafted a financial plan. She toured factories in Pennsylvania, learning the hard limits of small batch production. She and Morgan fought constantly over the advertising budget. If we don't buy visibility in the first 6 months, we're dead, Morgan argued. If we cut margins too close, we have to raise prices. If we go bankrupt trying to be cheap, we can't help anyone. I'm not trying to run a charity, Audrey yelled back before stopping herself. Helping sounds so condescending. I just want to build a place where people have options. Morgan crossed her arms, then build a company that actually pays the people giving them those options. They didn't speak for 3 days. On the 4th day, Morgan showed up with a revised business plan. Phased ad spending. You adjust the cost of goods to match reality. How's that? Audrey bowed her head. Please be my co-founder. That was the plan from day one. When Audrey handed in her resignation, Diane didn't try to stop her. You could stay and aim for a director role here. I still have to go. I know. The fact that you learned how to survive here means you're ready. Diane paused, a rare smile crossing her face. But I'm not going to give you the cliché "you can always come back if you fail" speech. If people think they have a safety net, they look away from their mistakes. If you fail, stare directly at the reason why. Work is not a final exam, it's just endless daily corrections. On her last day, Paige handed her a pair of vintage fabric shears. I used these when I was an intern. They're freshly sharpened. Are these important to you? Audrey asked. That's exactly why I'm giving them to you. You always try to cut everything by yourself with your bare hands. Use these when you need them. Audrey laughed as she cried. She named her new brand Sunbreak. She didn't want to wait for the long rain to completely end. She wanted to cherish the brief moments when light pierced through the clouds. She wanted to make clothes that allowed people to step outside, even if just for that brief window of light. Their first storefront was a retrofitted dry cleaner in a Brooklyn neighborhood. It was barely 400 square feet and only had one fitting room. The small back room was reserved for resume consulting and workshops. The launch was anything but smooth. The factory they contracted prioritized a massive corporate order and delayed their delivery by a month. Renovation costs overshot the estimate by $20,000. The online store's payment gateway crashed on opening day. On their first day open, they had 11 walk-in customers. They made exactly 3 sales. Morgan pulled the metal security gate down. That was lower than projected. Yeah. Don't look at the inventory spreadsheet, Audrey said. After closing, the two of them sat on the floor eating bodega sandwiches. Audrey checked the register numbers over and over. This was no glamorous independence. Rent was due every month. Staff salaries were pending. Unsold garments weren't ideals. They were just SKU numbers collecting dust. Audrey began talking extensively with the women who walked into the shop. It's beautiful, but I have nowhere to wear this outside of an office. The fitting room is too narrow for my cane. I want to take the career workshop, but I feel guilty if I don't buy a dress. They couldn't afford to renovate the store. So, Audrey rented a room at the local community center twice a month to host styling and career workshops. She made it clear that purchasing clothes was not required, and she partnered with a career counselor and an HR specialist. Only 6 people showed up to the first session. Megan, a 41-year-old former retail associate, had been out of the workforce for 9 years raising 2 kids. "I haven't done anything for so long," Megan said during introductions. "What exactly did you do for the last 10 years?" Audrey asked. "Just raising kids and taking care of my father-in-law a bit. Managing his hospital appointments, his medication, the kids' school schedules, the household budget, navigating family drama." "Exactly. Just because it didn't come with a W-2 doesn't mean you weren't using high skills." Tears welled up in Megan's eyes. Audrey continued. "However, simply writing household management on a resume doesn't magically guarantee a job. You need to relearn the current industry software and terminology. Let's sit down and sort out what skills you kept sharp and what you need to catch up on." It wasn't just blind encouragement, it was actionable strategy. Megan nodded, and 3 months later, she was hired as a contract manager at a commercial real estate firm. Another participant bombed her interview. Audrey sat with the devastated woman, analyzing why she was rejected and helping her find the next listing. Not every story had an immediate magical turnaround, and that reality was deeply important to Audrey. Her own life hadn't magically resolved the day she filed her divorce papers. There were days her incisions throbbed, days she wanted to quit, nights she couldn't sleep staring at the overhead costs. That was why she never promised them that courage guaranteed success. "Courage doesn't prevent failure, but I want to build a system where failing doesn't make you feel worthless," Audrey told them. 6 months after opening, Strike finally tipped into the black. The Prescott Foundation's medical grant had also launched. Audrey had zero involvement in the operations, but the nonprofit sent her anonymized feedback forms. "Having an escort there on discharge day made me feel safe. The week of meal deliveries meant my kids didn't have to stress about cooking. I am so grateful this didn't require my name on a PR brochure." Reading the last sentence, Audrey nodded quietly. Julian had kept his word. Neither his name nor Audrey's appeared anywhere in the grant's marketing. Around that time, Eleanor sent a thick envelope. Inside was a copy of an addendum to Nathaniel Prescott's will. Nathaniel had indeed tried to leave Audrey a portion of the family trust. Audrey had refused it during the divorce. Eleanor wrote, "Nathaniel didn't leave this to you because you were a Prescott wife. He remembered the young woman who saved his life at a subway station, stepping up to help a stranger without being asked. I respect your decision to decline it, but I want you to know you are not someone who left our family empty-handed. And because you have your own worth, you never have to bow to anyone." Audrey tucked the copy away. She had no intention of claiming the money, but she realized she no longer needed to aggressively reject Nathaniel's goodwill. The memory of being loved and the memory of being hurt could coexist in the same space. She didn't have to rewrite her entire life to fit only one of them. Chloe Sinclair also sent a long email. She was moving back to Europe. Her engagement to Julian was permanently dissolved. She explained why she had hated Audrey. "I convinced myself that you had stolen my rightful place." Audrey replied with 3 words. "That wasn't me. The decision to send Chloe abroad, the decision to marry Audrey, the decision to go to JFK. All of those were choices made by other people." Audrey refused to participate in a narrative where 2 women fought to the death over who stole a man. Chloe never replied. As winter set in, Audrey screwed a small brass plaque next to the door of Sunbreak. "Clothes for stepping outside under your own name." Audrey polished the plaque and flicked on the shop lights. The rain hadn't stopped completely, but the hours where the sunlight broke through the clouds were stretching longer than before. 3 years later, Sunbreak had expanded to 2 brick-and-mortar stores in Brooklyn and Manhattan, with a steady e-commerce stream. It wasn't pulling corporate mega-profits. Every year brought headaches over cash flow and skyrocketing raw material costs. One year they overproduced a viral item and choked on dead stock. Another time, 2 staff members clashed and one quit. But the company survived. Morgan was now the chief marketing officer and routinely screamed at Audrey in the boardroom. Audrey, you ignored the margins to add another free workshop tier again. If you want the entry point to be free, you have to aggressively upsell the paid consulting. Don't pay for your good intentions with our staff's overtime. It stung, but Audrey took it to heart. In the Prescott household, she had convinced herself that unpaid labor was love. She absolutely could not force her own employees to normalize martyrdom. Sunbreak began paying standard hourly rates for workshop facilitators, subsidizing the free slots through city grants and nonprofit partnerships. They added a strict clause stating that clients who declined to have their testimonials used for marketing would suffer 0 penalties. I don't want to run a company where people pay for our help by exposing their trauma, Audrey hammered into her staff. Megan, the woman from the very first workshop, was now a store manager at Sunbreak, working a 4-day week to balance her family. She was fierce when training the junior hires. Aunt Martha had recovered enough to walk with a cane, occasionally coming into the back room to help sew buttons. She was slow, but she had invented her own adaptive tools to work with one hand, and she was the harshest critic of any prototype. The armhole is too tight to lift, Martha critiqued. I widened it from last time, Audrey groaned. Hospital 4 poles exist. Wider. Audrey furiously scribbled a revision note. The brand's new line blurred the boundary between medical wear and daily life. Clothes you could wear to an infusion clinic and walk straight into a corporate office afterward. Clothes that made it easier for caregivers to assist with dressing. Audrey didn't project her own trauma onto every garment. She simply took the invisible inconveniences she had learned about through pain and quietly dissolved them into the design. One snowy winter evening, after locking up the Brooklyn store, Audrey found Julian standing on the sidewalk. He hadn't ambushed her. He had messaged Morgan days ago asking for exactly 5 minutes to drop off the Foundation's annual report. Julian set the manila folder on a bench under the awning. 186 people used the program this year. Hospital escorts were the most requested. Audrey opened the report. Behind the data were anonymous quotes. I was so ashamed to tell the nurses I had no one to pick me up. Knowing this program existed made me feel like I wasn't the only one. Audrey stared at the sentence for a long time. Thank you for keeping it going. Julian gave a self-deprecating smile. I guess I finally earned a thank you. This is strictly business. You said that last time too. They stood side by side under the awning. In the past, silence used to fill Audrey with overwhelming anxiety. Now she felt no need to force a conversation to fill the gap. Julian was still the CEO of Prescott Enterprises. According to Eleanor's lawyer, he had mellowed out, rarely raising his voice at his staff anymore. He hadn't seen Chloe since the engagement ended. I was at the hospital today and saw a young woman being discharged. Julian said, one of our grant escorts was carrying her bag, and her mother was waiting at the entrance. I thought about you. I wish someone had been there waiting for you that day. Audrey watched the snow fall onto the street. Morgan came for me. I was too late for the surgery, but I should have been there the day you were discharged. I should have been there from the start. Yes, you should have. The old Audrey would have tried to soothe his guilt by saying it didn't matter anymore. Now, she simply let the truth stand as it was. Julian looked down at his shoes. I used to think that if I told you to leave the past in the past, I could force you to forget what I did. Becoming the past doesn't mean it magically disappears, Audrey said. It still hurts. Sometimes I smell the antiseptic of a hospital waiting room, and it all comes rushing back. Sometimes hearing the phrase family signature required makes my chest tight. Julian's jaw clenched, but it doesn't derail my entire day anymore. Audrey continued, I can remember it and then go to work, eat dinner and sleep in the sense that my past no longer controls me. Yes, it is in the past. I see. Julian stayed quiet for a long time. Audrey, sometimes I still wish you would come back to me. The wind whipped the snow around them, but I also know that telling you that and expecting an answer is wrong. I just came to drop off the report. Audrey looked at him. It was an understanding that had arrived entirely too late, but just because it was late didn't make it fake. People sometimes only learn after they lose something. However, the person who did the learning isn't entitled to get their prize back. I think that is for the best, Audrey said. Julian nodded. The snow is coming down hard. You should get inside. He gave a slight bow and walked away down the avenue. He didn't look back once. Audrey watched him go, then stepped back into her shop. That wasn't the last time they spoke. She still got the annual report via email once a year. But Julian never tried to force his way back to the center of her life, and Audrey never used his lingering regrets to validate her own worth. Eleanor's dying wish receive had quickly put Audrey to the test. By its 4th year, Sunbreak needed capital to lease a dedicated factory space in upstate New York. Orders were surging, but factories willing to handle small batch adaptive wear specifications were rare. Having their own facility meant Audrey could work directly with operators on specialized fasteners. She needed $800,000. The banks loved Sunbreak's growth, but demanded personal guarantees and collateral. Audrey closed the loan packet, feeling a different kind of terror than she had outside the operating room. She had built a company under her own name. Was she about to sacrifice her personal life to the company again? An investment offer arrived from Prescott Capital. It wasn't a backdoor favor from Julian. It was an official term sheet approved by their ESG, Environmental, Social and Governance Investment Committee. The terms were objectively better than anyone else's. Morgan looked at the letterhead. I want to reject it just reading the name, but as an executive, it's a solid deal. Audrey stayed silent. If she took Prescott money, people might say her success was just Julian's charity. It might look like she couldn't cut the cord. But if she let that fear dictate her business, she was still letting Julian control her decisions. Audrey pitched her business plan to multiple venture capital firms and compared the term sheets. She held an all-hands meeting with her staff, laying out the equity splits, voting rights, and clauses regarding brand integrity. Ultimately, she rejected Prescott Capital. She went with a smaller regional fund dedicated to revitalizing Appalachian manufacturing. The check was smaller, but they offered a massive network of maturing, and Audrey retained majority voting rights. Audrey personally called the partner at Prescott Capital to explain the rejection. The partner sounded surprised. We assumed you were concerned about the optics regarding CEO Prescott. That was a consideration, Audrey replied. But it wasn't the deciding factor. Your fund simply didn't match the specific operational support we needed on the ground. A few days later, a short email arrived from Julian. Thank you for giving our proposal a fair review. I understand the reasoning behind your decision. Audrey replied, thank you for treating us like a standard portfolio company. That was it. In that brief exchange, Audrey finally understood the difference between rejecting someone and setting a boundary. True independence didn't mean violently refusing any help. It meant looking at the terms, picking what suited you, and calmly stating your reasons when you walked away. The power to make that choice was what independence actually looked like. The new factory was established in an old textile mill in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Audrey hired 3 veteran machinists who had been facing layoffs, setting up a system where they trained her young designers. On her first visit, a 70-year-old seamstress looked at Audrey's spec sheet. Making it convenient is fine, but if you focus so much on utility that you lose the beauty of the silhouette, it's garbage. Audrey bowed her head. Please teach me. She wasn't there as a savior. She refused to hide behind the noble banner of saving American manufacturing just to underpay skilled labor. Her contracts mandated fair wages, consultation fees, and the names of the lead seamstresses on the garment tags. On the wall of the Allentown office, Audrey framed a quote from Eleanor's letter, rest, rely on others, receive. She looked at it every time she caught herself trying to shoulder the world alone again. As the brand entered its 5th year, Audrey faced a failure that made her question her entire methodology. In her 3rd cohort of workshops, there was a 38-year-old woman named Natalie Foster. Natalie had been an editor at a publishing house, but quit to solo parent while her husband traveled for work. After a 7-year gap, she finally landed a job at a digital media company. The day the offer came in, Natalie sobbed in the back room of Sunbreak. "They finally believe I can still work." Audrey was thrilled. With Natalie's permission, Sunbreak posted a brief anonymous success story on their social media. Back to editing after a 7-year gap, but 3 months later, Natalie quit. The startup culture demanded brutal, unrecorded overtime. Simultaneously, her child started experiencing severe anxiety and refused to go to school. Her husband told her she should take a step back if her job was ruining the household. And her mother-in-law blamed Natalie's ambition for her child's distress. Natalie endured it alone for 2 months until she collapsed in an office bathroom from a panic attack and was taken to the ER. When Natalie returned to the workshop, she didn't cry. She handed back the blazer Audrey had lent her for the interview, perfectly dry cleaned and folded. "I'm so sorry I failed." Audrey's reflex was to say it wasn't your fault, but Natalie shook her head. "Please don't comfort me right now. The hardest part is that everyone else is deciding what this means before I can. My husband says it was a smart retreat. The company says women with resume gaps are too unstable. My friends tell me it was brave just to try, but I don't even know what this failure means to me yet." Audrey fell silent. She realized she had been trying to shove Natalie into an easily digestible career comeback narrative. She had subconsciously decided that getting the job was the finish line and quitting was a regression. "Then let's not put a label on it yet," Audrey said. She pushed the folded blazer back toward Natalie. "Just rest first. You are allowed to be angry. If you ever want to work again, the door is open. If you decide you never want to go back to publishing, that is also a choice. Your worth is not determined by whether you make my workshop look successful." Natalie stared at Audrey, and finally, the tears broke through. After that incident, Audrey scrubbed the job placement rate statistic from Sunbreak's press kits. Morgan was vehemently against it at first. "We need that number for the state grant applications. We can't just ignore measurable results." "We need to look at results," Audrey agreed. "But I refuse to make getting hired the only metric of success." "Then how do we measure it?" Audrey spent weeks thinking about it. The workshops introduced new rubrics. Did the participants successfully identify their non-negotiable boundaries? Did they learn about state family leave policies? Did they clearly communicate their available hours during the interview? Securing a job was important, but having the courage to reject a job that would destroy them was logged as an equal success. When Audrey pitched this new metric at a city council grant meeting, a bureaucrat frowned. "Counting resignations as a success seems a bit defeatist, don't you think? Pushing women into unsustainable jobs just to pad a quarterly spreadsheet, only to let them absorb the guilt when they inevitably crash, that is defeatist." Audrey fired back. "True support means staying with them until they find a condition they can actually survive in." The proposal didn't pass immediately. It took 6 months of grueling negotiations with the budget committee. The program started as a tiny pilot project, constantly adjusting based on participant feedback. Audrey embraced the slowness. In her marriage, she had tried to fix everything instantly by herself. She used to believe that a good wife erased problems quickly without bothering anyone. Now, she knew that taking the time to build a messy consensus was the actual work. Around the same time, internal tensions flared at Sunbreak. Megan, the store manager, was taking frequent emergency PTO as her mother's dementia worsened. An anonymous employee survey read, "The company bends over backward for people with families, leaving the single staff to drown in the workload." Audrey felt a sharp pain in her chest. The company was built on the ideal of supporting women through life transitions. She had to protect Megan, but if she used righteousness as an excuse to force unpaid sacrifices onto someone else, she was just recreating the Prescott family dynamic in a new skin. Audrey instituted one-on-one meetings with everyone. Single employees had doctor's appointments, classes, social lives, and a basic need to rest. If family emergencies were treated as the only valid excuse for time off, the childless employees were being treated as expendable spare parts. "We are not going to be a company where caregiving forces you out," Audrey announced at an all-hands meeting. "But we are also not going to be a company that survives by exploiting the goodwill of the people picking up the slack." Audrey created a roving float pool of part-time staff to cover sudden shift absences. She mandated that corporate executives, including herself and Morgan, take regular shifts on the retail floor. She introduced a bank of no-questions-asked micro-PTO hours available to everyone, regardless of marital or parental status. Overhead costs spiked, profit margins took a temporary hit. Morgan sighed, looking at the quarterly profit and loss statements. "Running a righteous company is expensive. If you try to buy righteousness on a discount, someone else is paying the difference with their time," Audrey replied. Another profound quote. "No, that's just basic accounting." They laughed. But they spent the rest of the night aggressively reforecasting their cash flow. Audrey no longer hid the fact that she wasn't a perfect CEO. When she made a bad call, she apologized and rewrote the rules. When her staff pointed out hypocrisies between her brand messaging and reality, she didn't silence them to protect her ego. Living under her own name didn't mean proving she was always right. It meant she was responsible for fixing it when she was wrong. That winter, Eleanor Prescott passed away. She was 92. According to the message Julian relayed through attorney Jenkins, she had taken a stroll through her assisted living garden the day prior and passed peacefully in her sleep. Audrey debated whether to attend the funeral. Even after leaving the family, Eleanor had sent her seasonal cards and bought one piece from every Sunbreak collection. She never accepted comps. In the checkout notes, she always typed, "Pay your workers what they are worth." Audrey attended the service as Audrey Mercer. She wore a black morning dress of her own design. It allowed her to sit for hours without compressing her abdomen, and the deep pockets held the letters from her mother and Eleanor. Some of the Prescott relatives looked incredibly uncomfortable seeing her. The aunts who used to mock her as the middle-class climber actively avoided eye contact. Julian met her at the reception desk and bowed deeply. "Thank you for coming." "I wanted to say goodbye," Audrey said. She didn't engage in further small talk. The photo of Eleanor above the altar showed her smiling warmly. Audrey offered incense and spoke in her heart. "Because you truly saw me, I didn't completely disappear inside this family. But you don't need to keep blaming yourself. I know how to find myself now." After the service, Eleanor's estate lawyer handed Audrey a small wooden box. Inside was a hand-stitched leather glasses case Audrey had made for Eleanor during her first year of marriage, along with a letter. "Audrey, by the time you read this, I will no longer be able to apologize to you. So, I am leaving you with a request, not an apology. Please do not decide that the 5 years you spent in the Prescott house were entirely a mistake. The days I was saved by the meals you cooked, the days you sat with me at the hospital, the days we looked at the plum blossoms in the garden, I was truly happy. But I should have stopped you much sooner before you lost yourself for the sake of that happiness." When people receive endless kindness, they begin to believe the supply is infinite. I told Julian that countless times, but you do not need to wait for him to finally understand it. The clothes from your shop gave an old woman like me the joy of picking out my own outfit to face the world. Please, from now on, do not use up your entire self just to save other people. Rest, rely on others, receive. The final line was written in Eleanor's shaky script. "You have already given enough." Audrey clutched the wooden box and wept. It was a different kind of crying than when she lost her mother. Her mother's death was compounded by the agonizing empty space where Julian should have been. Her partying with Eleanor came with a proper goodbye, words exchanged, and closure. Losing someone is always a tragedy, but it doesn't always have to leave behind a hollow regret. As Audrey left the funeral hall, Julian was standing in the corridor. "Grandmother looked forward to visiting your shop every month," he said. "I know. She always insisted on paying full retail price. She threatened to disown me if I asked for a discount." They shared a brief, quiet laugh. "Audrey," Julian said, "when grandmother died, the first thing I wanted to do was call you." Audrey listened quietly. The old me would have called you purely out of my own grief, demanding you come comfort me. But grandmother was important to you, too. I knew I had to prioritize how you wanted to say goodbye, which is why I went through the lawyers. I appreciate that you did, Audrey said. Julian lowered his gaze. Do you think I've changed even a little? Audrey didn't answer immediately. Whether you have changed or not isn't for me to judge, but if the next person who stands beside you doesn't have to lose themselves to survive, then I think that's your answer. Julian nodded slowly. I understand. They walked the same path toward the subway station that day, not shoulder to shoulder like a married couple, but as two individuals whose routes simply happened to align for a moment. In front of the station, Julian turned toward a different subway line. Audrey didn't call out to him. Julian didn't look back. Following Eleanor's passing, Audrey closed the shop for a week. The old Audrey would have been terrified of the workflow stopping and forced herself to log in the next day, but she accepted the letter's command to rest. Morgan managed the executives. Megan handled the shift schedules, and the staff took care of the customers. When Audrey returned a week later, the company was running perfectly. Audrey felt a brief flash of loneliness, followed immediately by profound relief. Building a place that collapses without you isn't proof that you are needed. A place that continues even when someone rests, that is a place people can safely return to. 2 years later, Audrey published a book. The title was Restart. The publisher initially pitched the subtitle, The Triumphant Comeback of a Discarded Corporate Wife. Audrey vetoed it. I didn't suddenly gain value because I was thrown away. I had value while I was married, too. I just couldn't see it, and neither could anyone else. The book barely mentioned Julian or Chloe. It was about waiting alone outside an operating room, the day she filed the divorce papers, being interrogated about her 5-year resume gap, messing up spec sheets, and crying in a corporate bathroom, selling exactly 3 garments on opening day, getting yelled at by Morgan for giving away too much free consulting. It wasn't a tale of glamorous revenge. It was a chronicle of life's endless daily corrections. Leaving doesn't magically fix everything the next day. Freedom requires paying rent. Choices come with responsibility. And when you fail under your own name, there is no one else to blame. But to me, a life where I can fix my own mistakes with my own hands is far warmer than a life spent pretending to be perfect while drowning in someone else's indifference. During a small promotional speaking event, a young journalist asked a question. If you could go back 5 years, what would you say to yourself? Audrey didn't answer right away. 5 years ago, she was sitting in the massive Prescott living room, waiting for Julian to come home, pushing her mother's phone calls to voicemail, reheating cold dinners, genuinely believing that if she was just a little more patient, she would be loved. She had no desire to scold that version of herself. I would hug her, Audrey said. The room fell silent. I would tell her, "You are not unloved because you are weak, and his phone isn't going straight to voicemail because you didn't try hard enough." Audrey chose her words carefully. And then I would tell her, "Someday you are going to stop waiting for someone to come save you. You will sign your own medical forms, your own divorce papers, your own employment contracts, and your own corporate incorporation documents. You will choose your life not through someone else's permission, but through your own will." That day is going to be terrifying, but I want her to know she will not be alone. After the event, a woman handed Audrey a letter. She was a 50-year-old widow who wrote that after her husband passed away from a long illness, her life felt entirely empty. "Tomorrow, I am going to an orientation at a vocational school. If it doesn't fit, I will just come home. But first, I am going to step outside." Audrey locked the letter in the safe at her store. It was worth more to her than any award or sales record. The flagship Sunbreak store still had that original brass plaque by the door, "Close for stepping outside under your own name." On rainy days, the letters looked dark. On sunny days, the brass caught the light and glowed gold. One spring morning, Audrey welcomed a customer before the store officially opened. It was a 29-year-old woman scheduled for a major surgery. She said she was looking for an outfit to wear on discharge day, but she was too terrified to make a decision. Audrey showed her a soft fronting wrap dress. You don't have to buy this today. Your body might feel completely different after the surgery, but I just wanted to have something ready. Then before we pick out a dress, let's confirm who is picking you up and what grants are available if they can't make it. The young woman looked shocked, then gave a small laugh. Aren't you a clothing store? Clothes are just a part of living. Audrey smiled. After going over the hospital discharge support protocols and the Foundation's grant program, the woman tried on the dress. Standing in front of the mirror, she placed a hand over her abdomen. I think I could walk out of the hospital in this. Audrey adjusted the hem. You can walk slowly and it's perfectly fine to sit down halfway. After the customer left, Morgan walked out from the back office, giving out social services advice before pushing inventory bright and early. You are still terrible at capitalism. She ended up buying it, didn't she? Results-based logic, Morgan laughed. Outside the shop windows, the overnight rain had finally stopped. Thin rays of sunlight were piercing through the clouds, illuminating the Brooklyn street. Audrey unlocked the front door and flipped the open sign. A long time ago, she used to wait for her husband on the other end of a dead phone line. In her mother's hospital room, outside the surgical ward, at the dining table of a sprawling mansion, she had waited, genuinely believing that someday someone would choose her. Things were different now. Waiting wasn't inherently bad, and she didn't need to cut down the version of herself who had believed in someone else as foolish. It was just that, sometimes in life there are moments when you have to go pick yourself up. In those moments, Audrey had written her own name over and over on surgical consent forms, on divorce papers, on employment contracts, on the corporate registry for her brand. And today, at the bottom of the store's opening checklist, she signed it again. Audrey Mercer. It was just a mundane piece of paper, but to her it was the consent form for her own life, renewed every single morning. We're open, Audrey called out. The staff dispersed to their stations. The air outside smelled of rain drying on the pavement. When she first walked out of the Prescott estate, she thought she had lost everything. But the truth was, on that day, she had finally gone to pick up the woman who had been sitting in someone else's house for 5 years waiting, and she had finally brought her home to her own life. Audrey hadn't forgotten the past. The empty chair at her mother's funeral, and the freezing cold water she drank alone after her surgery, still lived somewhere deep inside her, but she no longer made erasing those memories a prerequisite for her recovery. She would carry the pain. She would work. She would laugh, she would ask for help, and occasionally she would rest. She wasn't aiming to become someone completely untouched by scars. She was just going to be someone who kept making her own choices, scars and all. That was the restart Audrey had chosen. In the fitting room mirrors of her shop, a different woman's reflection appeared every day. A woman returning to work, a woman quitting her job, a woman starting medical treatment, a woman leaving her family, a woman building a new life with someone else. Audrey did not hand a single one of them the exact same right.